Sera locked the bathroom stall with shaking fingers and finally let herself breathe. The music outside was soft and expensive, the kind that floated through walls and made everything sound prettier than it really was. In here, under the dull yellow light, none of it worked. Her shoes were off. One heel had left a red mark across the back of her foot. The other hung loose from her hand, the strap half torn like it had given up before she did. She wasn't crying because she was unhappy. That would have been easier to explain. She was crying because for 3 straight hours, she had smiled at strangers who looked at her too long. Because every polite laugh at her table had something sharp hiding under it. Because every time someone said her name, it sounded like they were trying it on, seeing if it fit in a room like this. She pressed the back of her hand under her eyes, then leaned over the sink and splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, she looked tired, not ruined, not broken, just tired in a way makeup couldn't fix. "One more hour," she whispered to her reflection. Then she put her shoes back on, lifted her chin, and stepped out into the bright hallway. By the time she returned to the ballroom, the room had swallowed itself back into glitter and soft voices. Crystal glasses, gold light, smiles that never quite reached the eyes. Across the room, Cillian sat at the head table, still in his chair, still untouched by the champagne in front of him. His face gave nothing away, but his eyes were on the room, not the stage, not the guests. The room, and beside his hand was a folded piece of paper he still hadn't opened. What neither of them knew that in 40 minutes, everything in that room was going to break open. Sera Mwangi is not someone you'd call put together. At 31, she's behind on rent, still grieving a mother she lost 2 years ago, and working double shifts as a hospital janitor while quietly finishing an online degree she's too embarrassed to tell anyone about. She's made bad decisions, trusted the wrong people, stayed too long in situations that diminished her, and carries a self-doubt so deep she sometimes can't look strangers in the eye. She is not a hidden diamond. She is a person actively trying to become someone better, and failing some days more than others. Cillian Vael is not a romantic hero either. He built his logistics company through obsession that cost him a marriage, 2 friendships, and according to his therapist, in a working relationship with his own emotions. The accident that put him in a wheelchair 4 years ago didn't make him wise or reflective. At first, it made him bitter, controlling, and deliberately cruel to people who tried to help him. He burned through 3 rehabilitation programs before ending up at the underfunded public hospital where Sera worked nights. This was not the kind of story people like telling themselves. People prefer simple stories: a girl in a white dress, a broken man softened by love, a miracle hidden inside pain. But there was nothing simple about Sera Mwangi or Cillian Vael. So when people looked at them, they made the easiest choice. They saw a woman from nowhere and a man with too much money and too much damage. They saw a gold digger and a fool, a desperate woman and a broken billionaire. That version was simpler, cleaner, easier to laugh at. The truth was harder to look at, because the truth was not about a perfect woman saving a ruined man, and it was not about a rich man rescuing a struggling one. It was about 2 deeply imperfect people who had seen the worst in each other early, clearly and up close, and chose to stay anyway. Most nights, Sera's life felt like something held together with weak thread. She worked the late shift at St. Gabriel's, moving through halls that smelled like bleach, old coffee, and tired people. By 2 in the morning, the hospital changed. The loud parts faded. What stayed was the soft hum of machines, the squeak of her cartwheels, and the strange loneliness that always seemed to settle under fluorescent light. She was good at making herself useful, good at disappearing when needed. But she was also good with people in ways nobody wrote down. The old men in recovery asked for her by name because she never rushed them. A woman on the 3rd floor with early memory loss once called her by her daughter's name, and Sera had not corrected her. She had just sat there for 10 minutes, smiling, listening to the same story 3 times like it was the first. One patient with bad knees and a worse mood only laughed for one person in that whole ward, and somehow it was always her. That was one side of Sera. The other side kept overdue bills folded in a kitchen drawer she avoided opening. The other side had lent money to a coworker who swore she would pay it back next Friday, then watched 3 Fridays come and go in silence. The other side ate toast for dinner sometimes and told herself it was by choice. And then there was her mother. Some nights after her shift, Sera sat in the dark on the edge of her bed and called her mother's old number just to hear the voicemail. She never left a message. She just listened to that warm, ordinary voice say her name and waited for the beep like some part of her still believed time could bend if she wanted it badly enough. She was trying, that was true. Quietly finishing an online degree, taking one class at a time, closing tabs fast whenever anyone walked past, like ambition itself was something embarrassing. But trying did not always look noble. She had borrowed money she should not have borrowed, said cruel things in moments when she felt cornered, walked away once from something she really wanted because failing in public felt worse than never trying again. She was not the kind of woman people wrote poems about. She was a woman who kept going anyway, and some days that was the bravest thing about her. Before the accident, Cillian Vael was the kind of man people admired from a distance and struggled to live with up close. He built his company the same way he moved through life, fast, sharp, and without much patience for anything that slowed him down. He remembered numbers, noticed weaknesses, and could walk into a room full of executives and leave with exactly what he wanted. That kind of focus made him rich. It also made him hard to love. He missed birthdays, cut conversations short, treated feelings like delays in a schedule he had no time for. By the time success had finished building him into someone powerful, it had also hollowed out parts of him he barely noticed were gone. Then came the accident. People like telling themselves that pain softens a person, that suffering makes you kinder, deeper, more grateful. But that was not what happened to Cillian. It made him furious. Furious at his body, furious at help, furious at the way people looked at him now, either with pity or careful fake respect. He hated needing anyone for anything, and when people tried to reach him, he pushed them away in the ugliest ways he could manage. His ex-wife leaving was not the act of a cold woman abandoning a broken man. It was the decision of someone who had already spent years trying to love a person who did not know how to be loved back. The accident did not ruin their marriage. It only stripped away the last excuses holding it together. The company survived because his mind never stopped moving. Deals still closed. Mom meetings still happened. Orders were still given. On paper, he remained impressive. But the man himself was falling apart in quieter places. 3 rehab programs, 2 therapists, more canceled sessions than completed ones in the beginning. Nurses who learned when to step back. Doctors who spoke about progress in careful tones he seemed to resent on principle. One night, close to 2 in the morning, his assistant found him alone in a hospital corridor, sitting in his wheelchair under that flat white light, saying nothing at all. No phone in his hand, no work open, no anger left to throw at anyone, just silence. That was the part people never saw, not some brave man healing with dignity, not a wounded billionaire becoming wise through pain, just a man in pieces he did not know how to name, trying and failing and trying again. And he was not healing beautifully. He was barely surviving, badly. The first time Sera met Cillian Vael, he was already in a bad mood, and she was already past done. It was nearly 1 in the morning at St. Gabriel's. Her shift had ended 2 hours earlier, but someone had called in sick. Another floor needed help, and she had said yes because saying no always felt more expensive later. The corridor outside physical therapy was almost empty, washed in that cold hospital light that made everyone look worn out and slightly unreal. She was pushing her cleaning cart with one hand and holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee in the other when she saw him. Cillian was near the wall, one wheel of his chair angled wrong. A file slipped loose across the floor beside him. He looked expensive even there. In a hospital gown under a dark coat thrown over his shoulders, like money had followed him in and refused to leave. His face was tight with frustration. Sera slowed. "Do you want me to get someone?" He looked up at her like she had insulted him. "What I want," he said, voice flat and sharp, "is for people in this place to stop asking useless questions and do their jobs." The words landed harder than they should have. Maybe because she was tired. Maybe because grief had been sitting too close to her skin that week. Maybe because some part of her was just done being spoken to, like she was less than human. She stared at him for a second, then said, "You dropped a file, not a crown." Silence. Even she looked surprised after she said it. His face changed. Not wounded, not embarrassed. Colder. By the next afternoon, she was in a cramped office with HR, listening to a woman with tired eyes explain that a patient had filed a complaint about unprofessional conduct. One more mark like that, she was told gently, and her position could be reviewed. She walked out shaking with anger, shame, and the sudden, stupid urge to cry. That should have been the end of it, but St. Gabriel's was small in the way overworked places often are. People kept crossing paths, schedules overlapped, corridors repeated, and over the next few weeks, she kept seeing him, Sometimes after therapy, sometimes sitting in silence near the elevators, sometimes looking so exhausted he seemed older than he was. What unsettled Cillian was not that she had talked back. It was that she had not adjusted herself around him the way everyone else did. And what unsettled Sera was that beneath all that arrogance, she had started to notice something harder to ignore. Not kindness, something lonelier. By the time Cillian asked Sera to marry him, they had already seen too much of each other to pretend. He had seen her on nights when she was so tired she forgot words halfway through a sentence. She had seen him after physical therapy, angry at his own body in a way that made the whole room feel smaller. He knew she still listened to her mother's voicemail when the world got too heavy. She knew he sometimes went silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because saying it would cost him more than he knew how to give. So when he asked, it was not grand. No orchestra, no ring hidden in dessert, no crowd waiting to clap. When it happened in his apartment on a gray evening, with rain against the windows. She was standing near the kitchen counter, still in her work clothes, holding a mug gone cold in her hands. He looked at her for a long moment, like he had already decided and was only now finding the words to match it. "Marry me," he said. Just that. Sera stared at him. For 1 second, something in her chest lifted. Then all the fear rushed in after it. "No," she said. The word hung there between them, bare and honest. He did not flinch. He did not turn cold. He just waited. She looked down at the mug in her hands. "I don't know how to do this without becoming someone else," she said quietly. "I don't know how to stand next to your life and not start shrinking. I don't trust that you want me. I think maybe you want the version of me that stays calm. Adra says the right thing. Never asked for too much. The version I become when I'm scared." Cillian said nothing for a moment. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Then he nodded once and said, "You don't have to decide now." That was all. No pressure, no wounded pride, no trying to talk her out of her own fear. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of work, missed sleep, bills, doubt, and the same question following her everywhere. In the end, nothing magical changed. She did not wake up suddenly fearless. She did not become certain. She just got tired of watching fear make every important choice in her life. So she went back. He was by the window when she arrived, a file open on his lap, half reading and half somewhere else. He looked up when she stepped inside. This time when she said yes, her voice shook a little. But she meant it. Not because she thought everything would be easy. Because for once, she wanted her life to be chosen by something other than fear. The reception was meant to be small. That was the original plan. Just a quiet dinner, a few people, no spectacle. But money had a way of pulling people into rooms they did not belong in. By evening, the ballroom was full of polished faces, soft music, and the kind of expensive warmth that never reached the heart of anything. The lights were low and golden. Glasses caught the glow. Every table looked perfect. And Sera, sitting at the head table beside Cillian, felt less like a bride and more like something placed there for people to study. They smiled at her too long. Some spoke to her with careful kindness, the kind people use when they are trying not to show what they really think. And others barely bothered to hide it. A woman in a silver dress leaned toward her at one point and asked, with a bright little smile, "So how did you two meet exactly?" The exactly did all the damage. Sera answered anyway. The woman nodded like she had just confirmed something private to herself. Later, one of Cillian's business partners raised a glass and gave a toast that sounded generous if you didn't listen too closely. He spoke about unexpected love, about grace arriving from ordinary places, about how life sometimes blesses even the most difficult men with loyalty when they need it most. People smiled. A few laughed softly. Sera held her own smile in place until her jaw hurt. Across from her, Cillian said nothing. His champagne stayed untouched. Near his hand sat the folded piece of paper his therapist had given him that morning. "Read it when you're ready," she had said. He had not opened it. Then his brother came over. There was no scene, no raised voice, just a hand lightly touching Sera's elbow and a quiet, "May I?" He led her a few steps away, near the terrace doors where the music softened. He looked at her for a moment, not with anger, but with something colder. "Do you know what people are saying?" he asked. Sera said nothing. He gave a small shrug. "They think you're either very clever or very desperate. I'm still deciding." She felt the words land low and hard, but her face did not change. When she came back to the table, she sat down gently, almost too carefully, as if sudden movement might crack something open. Cillian looked at her once and knew something had happened. She gave him a small smile that did not reach her eyes. And across the room, something in him began to tighten. Not suddenly, not loudly, just slowly, quietly, like a wire being pulled too far. Even Sera could feel it now, though she did not yet understand what it meant. Cillian did not plan to stand that night. If anyone had asked him that morning, he would have said the same thing he always said when it came to progress. Some days were better, some were not. For the past 8 months, he had been doing private physical therapy in quiet rooms with drawn blinds and no audience. Standing was possible now, but only briefly, and never without pain. It took focus. It took effort. It took more out of him than he liked anyone knowing. So no, this was not some secret reveal he had been saving for the perfect moment. By then, the room had already worn Sera down in 100 small ways. She had smiled through questions that were not really questions, sat through a toast that dressed insult up as kindness, taken in every glance, every pause, every look that lasted 1 second too long. Cillian had seen all of it, but what broke something open in him was smaller than that. A woman near the dance floor had stopped Sera to speak to her, smiling with that polished, empty warmth rich people often mistook for charm. Sera answered politely, nodded once, then excused herself. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. As she turned away before her face settled back into calm, Cillian saw it, the tiredness. Not dramatic, not tearful, just a deep, worn-out sadness she was trying very hard not to let anyone see. That was the moment. He looked at the folded paper near his hand, then at the untouched champagne. Then at Sera, moving through the room like she was carrying the weight of it alone, and suddenly sitting still felt worse than the pain. He pushed his chair back. At first, nobody understood what they were seeing, just the scrape of movement against the floor, the slight shift at the head table. Then Cillian's hand closed around the edge of the table, his jaw tightening, his whole body pulling against effort most people in that room could not even imagine. When he rose, it was not smooth. It was not easy. It was not miraculous. It was painful, controlled, human. And because it was real, the room felt it. Conversations cut off in the middle. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the music seemed to fall back. The guest noticed before he said a single word. And by the time every eye in that ballroom turned toward him, silence had already done half the work. For a second, Cillian just stood there, one hand gripping the table, the other hanging tight at his side as if letting go too quickly might undo the whole thing. No one moved. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. Not the polished voice people knew from boardrooms and interviews. It sounded like it had come from somewhere deeper, somewhere he usually kept locked. "I know what some of you have been saying tonight," he said. His eyes moved across the room, calm and direct. "And worse, I know the tone, because before the accident, I was fluent in it." A few people looked down. A few froze where they were. No one tried to laugh now. He turned slightly, looking toward one of his business partners, then toward his brother. Not dramatic, not cruel, just exact. "Well, you smiled at my wife," he said, "and spoke about her like she was either charity or strategy. Some of you did the same to me. You just used softer words." The room stayed still. "I'm not angry because you misjudged me," he went on. "I've earned more of that than I like admitting. Before the accident, I was cold, self-important, hard to live with. My ex-wife did not leave a good man in a hard season. She left a man who had been giving her reasons for years." That landed harder than anything loud could have. Then his face changed when he looked at Sera. "But you were wrong about her." His voice softened. "You don't know her. You know the dress, the headlines, the version of her that makes this room comfortable." He took a breath. "You don't know that she stayed after her shift to sit with a patient who was scared to fall asleep alone. You don't know that she talks to people like they still matter when the rest of the world has already started treating them like a burden. You don't know that the first time I asked her to marry me, she said no because she refused to love me dishonestly." Sera's mouth parted, just slightly. Cillian picked up the folded paper with careful fingers and opened it. "My therapist asked me to read this when I was ready," he said. "I wrote it a year ago." He glanced down, then read aloud. "Become someone whose presence feels safe, not powerful." The words seemed to settle over the room. Sera started crying then, not because he had stood, not because everyone was watching, but because he had said the one thing she had needed and never asked for. He had seen her, not the rumor, not the rescue story, not the bride at the center of a spectacle. Her. And the room did not recover right away. No one rushed to fill the silence. No one seemed brave enough to be the first person to pretend nothing had happened. The music had stopped somewhere in the middle of Cillian's speech, and now the whole ballroom felt stripped down, almost plain, as if truth had taken something expensive out of it. Sera stood very still, her face wet, one hand lightly pressed against her mouth. Cillian lowered himself back into his chair with care, the effort finally showing now that the moment had passed. But something about him had changed. Not his posture, not his face, just the air around him. He looked less like a man defending himself, and more like a man who had stopped hiding. His brother was the first to leave. Not dramatically, no final remark. He picked up his jacket, spoke quietly to no one in particular, and walked out through the side doors without once looking back. A few others followed soon after, suddenly interested in early flights, long drives, babysitters, anything that would get them out of that room with their dignity still partly intact. The people who stayed were quieter now, more careful. Later, when the lights softened and the crowd had thinned, Sera and Cillian found themselves alone for a minute near the edge of the dance floor. The flowers were beginning to droop. Half-empty glasses sat abandoned on tables. Somewhere in the kitchen, plates clinked softly. Sera looked at him and gave a small, shaky laugh. "You really know how to make an evening uncomfortable." A tired smile touched his mouth. "I'm told it's one of my strengths." She shook her head, then stepped closer. "You didn't have to do that," she said. I know," he answered. That was what made it matter. She looked down for a moment, gathering herself. "When you read that line," she said softly, "I remembered the corridor." He nodded. So did he. The first night they had spoken like real people, not patient and worker, not rich man and tired woman. She had told him something she barely remembered saying. "You don't need to make people feel small to feel in control." He had carried it longer than she knew. Sera reached for his hand. Around them, the room no longer felt like a stage, just a place where something hard and necessary had happened. Years later, people would still tell the story wrong. They would talk about the wedding, the speech, the moment the billionaire stood up. But that was never the real ending. The real ending was quieter than that. It was two imperfect people. Still flawed, still learning, walking into whatever came next with nothing polished left between them. And for the first time, that was enough. People are quick to judge what they do not understand. They see money, struggle, disability, status, pain, and they build a story from the outside. But real people are always more complicated than the labels placed on them. Sera and Cillian were not perfect. That is what made their story matter. She was still healing. He was still changing. Neither of them arrived whole, but they chose honesty over image and truth over performance. And maybe that is the real lesson. If this story touched you, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that real love, real strength, and real worth are often misunderstood at first. And tell me in the comments, what stayed with you more, the moment he stood up or the truth he spoke after?